Expect the worst and you'll never be disappointed. The counseling center received a call from a woman who requested an intake appointment because she was overwhelmed with sadness and perpetually gloomy mood. She said she couldn't stand to feel this way any longer. Francine was a married woman in her mid-40s who worked in a skilled production position at a local airplane manufacturing plant with an average but generally pleasant marriage to two grown children. Upon meeting with her therapist, it wasn't immediately clear what the presenting problem was in her life. Francine described a reasonably functional marriage to a man who treated her with general respect and loyalty. Her children were reasonably well behaved and certainly weren't doing anything outside the norm for children of that age. Her job was somewhat stressful due to production quotas and workload, but wasn't really outside the norm, so as to appear to be the serious problem in her life. About 3 sessions in, however, the real underlying issue peeked its head out of the hole like a suspicious groundhog and made itself obvious. Francine had adopted a way of protecting herself from life's disappointments very early on in life and told herself regularly, "Expect the worst and you'll never be disappointed," and she lived by this principle to the letter. Her marriage? She assumed her husband would forget her on holidays, or would neglect her feelings, or would forget to complete household responsibilities through the week. Her kids? She always assumed they didn't do their homework, keep the room clean, or had a negative attitude about whatever it is that was supposed to happen, or whatever she did for them. Work? You guessed it. Her boss was always going to make unreasonable demands, other departments failed to follow through and deliver their part of the project, or she was not going to get her requested days off. It appeared that Francine was creating an artificial negativity, like a cloud over her life, when it didn't really appear that there would have been there normally. The therapist and Francine both agreed that in reality, her life wasn't that bad, and she could verbalize and recognize that things rarely ended up as bad as she presumed them originally to be. But yet, she still remained stuck in this very unhealthy and negative pattern and position. I have great empathy and understanding for anyone who says this to themselves, because I think trying to be aware of what possibly could go wrong and find some way of preparing for these things have, at times, seemed thoughtful and very adult in nature to me. My experience as a parent was that my children were usually gung-ho, excited and full of energy about life, and I had to bulletproof their ideas, their direction, and their environment because they wouldn't or couldn't. Our vision as parents is usually what keeps kids as safe as they are, not factoring in possible negative repercussions and considering them causes either kids or adults to put themselves in completely hazardous positions that can create permanent harm. There have been thousands of examples and even recent history in the media where someone either lacked a necessary sense of self-protection from either themselves or their offspring, and something tragic and damaging resulted because they didn't foresee something negative possibly happening. Back from the area around my hometown, there was an incredibly painful incident where two preteen girls were allowed to hike on a very rural and isolated trail by both sets of parents with the presumption that they would be fine with just cell phones. After the unspeakable happened, one of the mothers was interviewed in the local media, and she said something like, "I don't want to live in a world where you can't let your children walk alone in the woods." And while I felt great empathy for her loss and sadness, I also couldn't help but feel she did not have an appropriate sense of potential danger for her child. Sometimes it is good, right, and necessary to make allowances for the negative side of human nature. One of my great disappointments with modern life is that my children never got to experience the freedom that I did growing up as a young child in the early and mid-70s. Not only was I allowed to treat my neighborhood and the resulting neighborhoods as free range, but I also got up at 5 o'clock every morning and walked down to the corner to pick up my newspapers, put them in a satchel, and go walk through the dark streets, dropping papers off on people's front doorsteps. I look back with great appreciation for this experience because it taught me work ethic and independence that have helped me greatly through the rest of my life. But I also understand that somebody smartened up by the early 90s and figured out that it may not be the safest thing in the world to have your young children out alone and vulnerable in the early mornings. In fact, the very first missing child was ever put on the side of a milk carton was abducted from his morning paper route. So I understand completely that maybe the world has changed for the better. When people tell me that they always expect the worst, I understand that they are taking something that is good and right and necessary and taking it to an extreme. They are either taking it to an extreme because they have a negative view of the world, or because they are trying to lessen the pain of the jolts that life will naturally give each and every one of us before it is all over. Expecting the worst is trying to create an internal shock absorber to cushion yourself against life's bumps and crashes. It is, on the surface, a really smart way of pre-preparing for the big negative life events that are bound to come our way. In this case, the issue is this means you are setting up your whole emotional world on a 24/7 daily basis to just avoid the big shots, even if they only happen on the rarest of occasions, and you sacrifice most of your other days to guard off against them. This would be like worrying about someone dying in your family and carrying a negative daily mood for the expectation of the worst, and all that entails 365 days a year to guard against the one day every 2 or 3 years that someone in your extended family passes away. Unless you have a radically large family full of odd or sickly relatives that are dropping like flies, this is a radically high price to pay in numbers to avoid the shock and emotional pain of one of them passing away. Is it worth having 363 emotionally negative days a year to avoid being blindsided by two really terrible ones? The real problem in adopting this coping mechanism, logical as it may seem in selected situations, is the cost versus benefit ratio that is one's daily emotional mood and state of being. To adopt an expecting the worst always position will keep you in a state of continuous negative apprehension and will heighten anxiety when it actually is supposed to reduce our anxiety. It will also keep you from enjoying the positive that life could and does bring because you're saying that you can't trust in these positive things. Bracing for a car crash would be a logical and proactive thing to do if you were really sure that the car was going to crash imminently and there was nothing you could do about it. To brace for a car crash that hasn't happened is to make riding in a car perpetually miserable. If that car is a metaphor for your journey in life, then you make your entire journey in life uncomfortable and unnecessary. So now we are talking about setting the entire rest of your life up to only be a quest to minimize the pain of tragedy, and that you are completely giving up on any real chance of enjoying, savoring, or anticipating even any positive things that you could either create by yourself or have happen to you by chance. That sounds like an incredibly lopsided trade and a really bad deal. One of the best parts of my own childhood, and maybe one of the primary lessons I carried away from it, was learning to anticipate the next good thing that was going to happen. I remember being very young and looking forward to the end of the school year, starting with Easter, for whatever candy grab there ended up being, and then looking forward to my birthday, which was right before school ended. Then summer break, which was almost a full 3 months away from school. There were a lot of things to look forward to during the summer because summer would be an endless string of playing baseball with friends, hanging out, playing video games, going to bike rides on the trails, and enjoying a cycle of sunshine, popsicles, and cold drinks after coming in from playing hard. Every summer we did 2 things without fail, and those were we went to Kings Island, an amusement park in the Cincinnati area with lots of roller coasters and water rides, And we always went to the state fair, which was more carnival rides and pineapple whip, along with the excitement of Midway with all the lights, sounds, and smells that came with it. After that, you had football season. I was a big Cincinnati Bengals fan as a small child, and I watched all the games on Sundays. Then there was Halloween, and dressing up in costumes and chasing down bags of candy, followed by Thanksgiving, and then the incredible build-up at school to Christmas. The Christmas build-up went pretty much for an entire month, and there were movies, videos, and crafts, with everything working together to create a magical anticipation for the best holiday of the year, with gifts aplenty waiting for us under the tree. The point is that the point is not that I or any of us had an idyllic childhood, but that there was always something exciting coming up on the horizon to make life meaningful and positive and keep us anticipating the good that was to come. One of the things I find myself working on the most with an adult married couples is recreating the pattern of having something exciting to look forward to break the cycle of work, parent, work, parent, work, parent, which can be exhausting and dehumanizing and creates apathy and life dissatisfaction and depressive symptoms. Frequently, they have fallen into a rhythm of always producing and never getting to consume anything good and bracing for the next meteor to come crashing out of the sky on them. I think by now it's obvious that I am not in favor of excessively negative preparation ahead of the facts for things that could go wrong or potential tragedies that are yet to happen. I am actually in favor of a different sort of preparation, that is, different than coloring the sky with gray and dark clouds ahead of time so that the storm doesn't blow you over. I do believe that you can consider potential negative future events or even tragedy and decide ahead of time how you will handle them when and if they do occur. I would think that it would be wise to think about what would happen if you lost your job, or how you would handle the reality of losing one or both of your parents when they actually do pass away. This would seem a very proactive and assertive way of getting ready for those parts of life that will be negative and are unavoidable, and that this is much more specific way of coping than just painting your entire horizon and future with a negative brush and being depressed and anxious every day up until something happens. What Francine has done is something different. She's not waiting for something to happen and then decided how to respond to it, nor has she thoughtfully considered both positive and negative potential outcomes in situations. Nor did she decide ethically, morally, psychologically, or emotionally how she would respond if this thing, either positive or negative, had happened. What she has done is something much different. She has projected a negative outcome on something that hasn't happened yet. This is emotionally dishonest. This is a sort of deceitful Nostradamus technique that she would probably not consider as being dishonest, but as being somehow, some way, preparatory. She was trying to create a pleasant surprise when things do go well, and she was also trying not to be disappointed when they don't go well. What she ended up doing was ruining her own surprise. Imagine bracing yourself for disappointment on Christmas morning as a child by telling yourself you won't get anything that you put on your Christmas list and that your Christmas will be a horrible disappointment. So you go out to the tree and see the presents. You open the presents and find out that you got 80% of what was on your list, and you are pleasantly surprised. But if you have the expect the worst attitude, then probably not. You would probably not feel the rush of the pleasant surprise that you were hoping because you have dug yourself such a big hole of negativity ahead of time. You would not feel the excitement and joy of the 3 or 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, where you dreamt about what you would find on Christmas morning, and you wouldn't enjoy the school play that attempted to generate the magic of the Christmas spirit, and you wouldn't enjoy the snow, the Christmas lights, and watching Frosty the Snowman, because you've already decided the whole thing will be a disappointment. You will have essentially ruined any momentum building up to the event itself. While you may have saved yourself from a potential catastrophic letdown on Christmas morning, you also prevented yourself from having any positive enjoyment or excitement leading up to the event, and you've dug yourself such a big emotional hole that getting what you want Christmas morning will not feel nearly as good as if you had just maintained an even and neutral expectation leading up to the event. I would prefer that you adopt a less damaging way of trying to wisely brace yourself for the unavoidable parts of life that are going to be hard, painful, or even tragic. I believe that enjoying and savoring the good times in life and the wonderful memories that we create or that spontaneously combust upon us is in itself a fairly solid wall of protection against being blown over by the negative. For sure, it would be always painful to lose one's mother or father, even at advanced age, if they were a positive and present part of your life. But this immediate pain would eventually be transformed and overcome by the wave of wonderful memories that you have had with them over the course of your life. And if you have allowed yourself to have and experience and enjoy these moments. When noted singer Warren Zevon came on David Letterman's late night show after he had been diagnosed with terminal mesothelioma and was quickly approaching death, Letterman wisely asked him if there was anything he understood more clearly now that he was facing the mortality he had missed before. Now that he was facing his own mortality that he had missed before. Zevon paused briefly before replying legendarily, "Just how much you're supposed to enjoy every sandwich." Touché. Francine's self-protective negative bubble was a thick one and ended up not being quite the objective, logical, and reasonable defense mechanism that she wanted it to be seen as. Her therapist was a good investigator and suspected that the client didn't just create this way of thinking out of nowhere while she was in a good place in life, but suspected that it was a reaction to something painful. The therapist ended up uncovering that Francine had a painful reaction to her parents' divorce at the start of her teenage years, and had been disappointed regularly by one or both parents with visitations or how they handled managing the family on both sides. She had decided that she would never allow herself to be hurt by this again in the future. The therapist worked patiently with Francine to see the value of expect the worst and you'll never be disappointed, only protected her from the biggest disappointments and kept her perpetually disappointed and unhappy through all of the simple and mid-level daily transactions and interactions with others. Francine began to see that she was sacrificing 90% of her daily happiness and contentment to protect herself from the potential 10% of life that could be seriously or catastrophically negative. The therapist suggested that this would be like protecting yourself from the eventual reality of death by choosing to die emotionally ahead of time and thereby losing the ability to live during the whole of your life. Francine was challenged to decide whether she wanted to continue being unable to look forward to anything positive in her life and live in a depressed state, being unable to enjoy the things that were actually good in the moment. This was a challenging transition to be confronted with, and it took 4 or 5 months for her to make a definitive decision to start letting her guard down and letting things either go well or just go without predetermining what they would be ahead of time. With time, however, Francine improved, and she became a more enjoyable person for her husband, children, co-workers to be around, and she surprisingly found that this change in mood slanted things the other way and made things better out of her own effort and control. The therapist then worked with Francine to develop some presumptive problem-solving skills, where she could consider how she would handle things if they went back. Using these skills, Francine was able to weather the unexpected death of a favorite aunt without falling into a cataclysmic depression, and did not roll back to the position of, "See, I should have expected the worst, I would be better protected now." Instead, Francine grieved her aunt appropriately, and came to a place about the time she ended therapy where she was able to reflect affectionately and gratefully for all the time she spent with his favorite relative. Francine had successfully changed her value of expect the worst and you'll never be disappointed to I will embrace the good